More than 2 million years ago, one of the earliest members of our genus entered the landscapes of East Africa with almost none of the natural weapons needed to survive. It was small, it had no claws, no killing teeth, and no body built for speed. Around it lived cats, powerful enough to bring down large prey, hyenas capable of crushing bone, and grazing animals that could disappear across the grasslands in seconds. By almost every physical measure, this early hominin appeared dangerously unprepared, yet it may have possessed an advantage that did not exist in muscle, teeth, or speed. The ability to imagine a useful object before that object existed. A broken stone could become a cutting edge. A carcass abandoned by a predator could become a source of food. A remembered sequence of movements could become a technique performed again, and an action observed by another individual could possibly survive beyond the life of the one who first discovered it. The species traditionally placed at the center of this transformation is Homo habilis, the so-called handy human. For decades, its name seemed to mark a clear beginning, the first recognizable member of our genus. The first maker of stone tools, the ancestor whose growing brain began the long technological journey toward us. But almost every part of that story is now more complicated than it first appeared. Stone tools have been discovered that are older than Homo habilis. Fossils assigned to the species differ so much that some researchers believe they represent more than one kind of hominin. And the tools found beside early human remains do not carry the identity of the hands that made them. Homo habilis may not have been the first toolmaker. It may not have been our direct ancestor. It may not even represent one clearly defined species, yet its uncertain position in the human family tree makes it more important, not less. Homo habilis lived during a period when survival was beginning to depend on something new, not simply on a different body, but on a different way of responding to the world. So how did a physically vulnerable early hominin survive in a landscape shaped by climate, predators, and competition? And did Homo habilis truly mark the beginning of technological humanity? To understand that question, we must first enter a world that refused to remain stable. Around the time early Homo emerged, East Africa was undergoing long-term geological and environmental change. The East African Rift was not a single valley, but an immense system of fractures, rising highlands, volcanic zones, basins, and lakes. Tectonic forces slowly reshaped the ground. Mountains altered the movement of winds. Volcanic eruptions changed local landscapes. Basins collected water and then lost it. Habitats expanded, contracted, and shifted over thousands of generations. This did not mean that all of East Africa suddenly became an open savanna. The real landscape was more complex. Woodland, grassland, lake margins, rivers, wetlands, and drier areas could exist within the same broader region. A hominin moving through this world might encounter trees and shade in one area, then open ground a short distance away. A lake could provide dependable water for a long period, and later shrink as rainfall patterns changed. A resource that had supported one generation might become distant or disappear for another. At the same time, global climate patterns were changing. The northern hemisphere was moving deeper into repeated periods of cooling. In Africa, the effects differed by region and by time, but many habitats became increasingly variable. The challenge was not simply heat or cold, it was unpredictability. Specialization can be extremely successful when conditions remain stable. An animal with teeth perfectly adapted to one kind of plant can dominate while that plant remains abundant. A predator specialized for a particular prey can flourish while that prey remains available. But when food sources shift, lakes disappear, or vegetation changes, specialization can become a trap. A body shaped for yesterday's world may struggle in tomorrow's. This idea lies behind what paleoanthropologist Rick Potts called the variability selection hypothesis. The proposal does not claim that one climate event suddenly created humanity. Instead, it suggests that repeated environmental change may have favored ancestors able to adjust their behavior as conditions changed. In such a world, survival would not always belong to the strongest individual. It might belong to the most flexible, a creature capable of changing where it searched, what it ate, how it moved, and what objects it used. Such a creature could survive across a wider range of conditions than one dependent on a single strategy. This is an appealing explanation for the emergence of early Homo, but it remains a hypothesis, not a simple answer carved into the rocks. The environmental record is incomplete. Different regions changed in different ways, and several hominin species lived through these pressures at the same time. Still, one conclusion is difficult to avoid. Early Homo did not emerge into an empty landscape waiting to be conquered. It entered an ecological world already crowded with successful animals. There were large grazing herds, specialized plant eaters, powerful carnivores, and other hominins following their own survival strategies. Among these were robust forms, often placed in the genus Paranthropus. Their skulls, jaws, and teeth reveal a different evolutionary experiment, one that invested heavily in the ability to process demanding foods. Early Homo appears to have taken another path. Its teeth became smaller compared with some earlier or contemporary hominins. Its brain case expanded modestly, and its survival may have become more dependent on behavioral options rather than extreme anatomical specialization. But the earliest members of Homo did not suddenly possess modern human bodies. Homo habilis was a mosaic. Some features pointed toward the future. Others remained connected to a much older past. Imagine standing in East Africa around 2 million years ago. Across the uneven ground, a small bipedal figure moves through vegetation near a watercourse. It walks upright, but it does not look like a reduced version of a modern human. The face projects forward. The forehead is low. The skull is small by modern standards. The arms may appear long relative to the legs. The hands retain traits that have been interpreted as useful for climbing, although the precise meaning of those features remains debated. The body does not belong entirely to the trees, but neither does it seem fully committed to life on open ground. This combination is known as mosaic evolution. Evolution does not improve the entire body according to one unified plan. Different traits change at different rates because they face different pressures. A foot can become more effective for walking, while the shoulder retains features inherited from climbing ancestors. Teeth can become smaller, while the face remains relatively projecting. The brain can reorganize without producing an immediately modern body. A species can therefore carry the past and the future at the same time. Homo habilis is often described as one of the clearest examples of this principle. Some fossil evidence indicates effective upright walking. A foot attributed to Homo habilis from Olduvai Gorge preserves an arch, a feature important for terrestrial movement. But other remains attributed to early Homo have been interpreted as showing relatively long arms and aspects of the upper body that may have retained climbing ability. These fossils are fragmentary. They do not all belong to one complete skeleton. And because researchers disagree about which bones truly belong to Homo habilis, any single reconstruction must be treated cautiously. The familiar image of Homo habilis as a short, long-armed creature moving between trees and grasslands is plausible. It is not a photograph of a species we fully understand. That uncertainty matters. Trees may still have offered food, shelter, or protection, But spending time on the ground would have created new opportunities and dangers. Longer journeys between feeding areas would expose a small hominin to predators. Open terrain would make concealment more difficult. Carrying food or stone would consume energy. A species living between wooded patches, lake margins, and grasslands would need to make repeated decisions about when to move, where to stop, and which risks were worth taking. The body of Homo habilis may not have been optimized for long-distance travel in the way later Homo erectus would be, but it was capable of moving through a varied landscape, and this is where behavior may have become decisive. The brain of Homo habilis was still small compared with ours. Fossils assigned to the species generally fall within a broad range of roughly 500 to 700 cubic centimeters. That is far below the average brain volume of Homo sapiens. Yet size alone tells us very little about the thoughts an extinct species could produce. Brains are living networks. Their abilities depend not only on total volume, but on organization, connections, development, and interaction with the body. None of these survives directly in the fossil record. Paleoanthropologists sometimes study natural or digital endocasts, reconstructions of the inner surface of the brain case. These can provide clues about overall shape, and in some cases, impressions left by parts of the brain. But they cannot reveal a lost language. They cannot show a memory. They cannot tell us whether one individual taught another. Earlier researchers sometimes interpreted features of Homo habilis endocasts as evidence for changes in regions associated in modern humans with language and complex movement. Such interpretations remain controversial. Even a brain organized in a partly human-like way would not prove that Homo habilis spoke. Language does not fossilize. The throat, tongue, breathing control, neural circuits, social behavior, and symbolic abilities involved in modern speech cannot be reconstructed from one skull impression. Homo habilis may have used vocal calls, facial expressions, gaze, posture, and gestures more flexibly than some other primates. But the exact nature of its communication is unknown. The more defensible question is not whether Homo habilis could speak like us. It is whether its brain and hands could coordinate increasingly structured sequences of action. Picking up a sharp stone is one behavior. Producing a sharp edge from a chosen stone is another. The second requires an understanding, however limited, of cause and effect. One stone must strike another. The impact must occur at a useful position. The core may need to be turned. The result must be inspected. If the edge is poor, the action may need to be repeated differently. This does not require the maker to imagine a modern blueprint. Early stone tool production was not the same as designing a machine, but it did require control, persistence, and an ability to connect one movement with the result that followed. Modern apes remind us that tool use did not begin with the genus Homo. Chimpanzees use stones to crack nuts. They modify sticks to reach insects. Other primates use objects in ways adapted to local conditions. These behaviors can spread socially and form regional traditions. The dividing line between human and non-human technology is therefore not a simple boundary between animals that use tools and animals that do not. The deeper difference involves the degree of control, regularity, flexibility, and accumulation. Stone fracture creates evidence that can survive for millions of years. A wooden stick usually decays. A leaf used as a sponge disappears. Stone therefore gives us a distorted view of technological origins. It may preserve the hardest materials, while hiding older traditions made from wood, bark, bone, or plants. Even so, deliberately fractured stone marks a profound change. A cutting edge does not need to grow from the body. It can be created outside it. For much of the 20th century, archaeologists associated the earliest widely recognized stone tools with the Oldowan tradition. Oldowan assemblages include hammerstones, stone cores, and flakes, detached by force. The flakes can possess edges sharp enough to cut tissue. The cores themselves can also be useful. Some objects show repeated removals, suggesting that toolmakers understood how to rotate and strike stone in productive ways. To modern eyes, these tools may appear crude. There is no polished surface, no handle, no symmetrical blade. But simplicity of form does not mean simplicity of action. Stone does not fracture in any direction the maker desires. Its internal structure, shape, material, striking surface, and angle all influence the result. A poorly placed blow can crush the edge. A weak blow may produce nothing. An uncontrolled strike can break the core in an unhelpful way. Experimental toolmakers often discover that producing a consistently useful flake is more difficult than it looks. Skill develops through repeated attempts. The toolmaker must learn not only how to strike, but how to read the stone. Where is the best platform? Which side should face upward? How hard should the blow be? When should the core be rotated? When is a flake useful enough to keep? These decisions may be simple compared with later technologies, but together, they form a sequence, and a sequence can be remembered. Oldowan technology was once strongly linked with Homo habilis. The species name itself reflected this connection. When the first Homo habilis fossils were described from Olduvai Gorge in the 1960s, their discoverers argued that the remains represented a tool-making member of the human genus. The name habilis referred to ability or skill, but the archaeological record has since broken the exclusive link between this species and the first stone technology. At Lomekwi 3 in Kenya, researchers reported stone artifacts dated to about 3.3 million years ago. These objects are significantly older than the earliest widely accepted fossils of Homo. Their production appears different in some respects from classic Oldowan flaking, and researchers proposed a separate name, Lomekwian technology. Who made them is unknown. The landscape contained hominins outside the genus Homo. The tools demonstrate that deliberate stone modification may have begun before our genus appeared. More recent discoveries have complicated the picture further. At Nyayanga in Kenya, archaeologists found Oldowan tools dating to nearly 3 million years ago, along with butchered animal bones. No Homo habilis fossils were found in the excavated layer. Teeth belonging to Paranthropus were present. That does not prove Paranthropus made the tools. It does prove that archaeologists cannot safely assign every early tool to Homo habilis. Several kinds of hominins may have possessed technological abilities. Tool-making may have originated more than once, or an early tradition may have spread between populations whose biological identities remain unknown. The stone does not tell us the species name of the hand that struck it. This creates a does not tell us the species name of the hand that struck it. This creates a paradox. If Homo habilis did not invent stone tools, why does it remain central to the story? Because the first appearance of a behavior is not always the same as the moment that behavior becomes evolutionarily transformative. An isolated invention can disappear. A useful action repeated across many sites and many generations can become a survival system. During the age of early Homo, stone technology appears across broad regions and in association with increasingly varied activities. Hominins selected raw materials. They struck flakes. They carried stone. They used sharp edges to process animal tissue and perhaps plants, wood, or other materials. The important transition may not have been one brilliant individual creating the first tool. It may have been the growing dependence on a technological way of life. A natural tooth is fixed by biology. A stone edge can be replaced. A claw requires generations of anatomical evolution. A flake can be produced in minutes. Technology allowed hominins to borrow properties from the environment. Stone could become a tooth held in the hand. A heavy cobble could become a hammer. A sharp edge could open material the body alone could not process efficiently. This did not free Homo habilis from nature. It created a new relationship with nature. The landscape was no longer only a collection of food, water, shelter, and danger. It also contained potential solutions. A stone near a stream could become useful somewhere else. This possibility introduces planning. Planning does not need to involve distant imagination or complex language. It can begin with a simple separation between the place where a tool is obtained and the place where it will be used. If hominins carried stone away from a source, they accepted an immediate cost for a possible later benefit. The stone added weight. The destination might not provide food. The opportunity could fail. Yet transporting raw material would allow the carrier to arrive prepared. Archaeologists examine the geological origins of stone to understand such movement. When artifacts are found far from their natural source, the pattern can indicate transport. The distances associated with early technologies were often modest compared with those of later humans. But even short-distance movement matters. It suggests that the object retained value beyond the moment of discovery. The tool existed not only in the hand, it existed in expectation. Its greatest value may have appeared at the remains of another animal's death. East Africa was home to a formidable community of carnivores. Different species of large cats, hyenas, and other meat-eaters competed for prey and carcasses. A small hominin approaching a kill faced obvious danger. Predators sometimes return. Scavengers gather quickly. Competition can become violent. The smell of blood attracts attention across the landscape. Homo habilis was not equipped to fight a large cat directly. Its body did not make it an apex predator. But stone tools may have allowed early hominins to occupy a different position in the food web. They could process carcasses. Cut marks on fossil bones show that hominins used sharp stone edges to remove tissue from animals by at least the early Oldowan period. Percussion marks indicate that bones were also broken, sometimes providing access to marrow. These traces are among the most direct forms of evidence for early hominin behavior. A fossil skull can suggest anatomy. A cut mark can record an action, but interpreting that action is not simple. Did hominins kill the animal? Did they find it soon after death? Did they drive a predator away? Did they arrive after most of the flesh was gone? Did carnivores feed before or after the bones were cut? Different sites may preserve different answers. Researchers study the placement of cut marks, tooth marks, fractures, and the parts of the skeleton that remain. Some assemblages have been interpreted as evidence that hominins gained relatively early access to carcasses. Others suggest scavenging after carnivores had already fed. The old image of Homo habilis quietly waiting for lions to abandon every kill is too simple. So is the image of organized hunters dominating the savanna. Early hominins may have used several strategies depending on opportunity. They could scavenge. They might confront smaller competitors. They may sometimes have captured vulnerable animals. They also continued to depend heavily on plant foods. Flexibility was the advantage. A carcass was not only meat. Skin could be cut, tendons could be separated, bones could be broken. Marrow within large limb bones offered fat and energy. Organs, when available, could also provide valuable nutrients. Stone tools made some of these resources easier to reach. But we should resist turning this into a simple formula in which meat created the human brain. Brains are energetically expensive, but their evolution cannot be reduced to one food. Diet, life history, social behavior, body size, digestion, environment, and many other pressures interacted across long periods. Animal foods may have contributed to a broader dietary shift. They were not a magical fuel that automatically produced intelligence. Nor was Homo habilis surviving on meat alone. Plant remains rarely preserve as clearly as cut-marked bones. This creates another bias in the evidence. Roots, fruits, seeds, leaves, insects, eggs, and other foods may have remained essential. Stone tools might also have helped process plants or wood. Although identifying specific uses in very ancient artifacts is difficult, The most important quality may again have been flexibility. A species able to exploit both plant and animal resources could respond to environmental changes more effectively than one trapped within a diet. Technology expanded the menu. It also altered risk. A sharp flake could reduce the time needed to remove tissue. A hammerstone could open a bone that teeth could not easily crack. Faster processing might allow a group to leave a dangerous carcass sooner. But tools did not eliminate competition. A successful feeding opportunity could attract attention. Individuals had to remain alert. Some may have watched for predators while others processed food. It is tempting to imagine organized teams with defined roles. The evidence does not allow that level of certainty. Yet the social context cannot be ignored. Hominins did not live as isolated inventors. They lived near others. Young individuals developed within groups. Food could be consumed in the presence of companions. Tool-making could be observed. The next major threshold may therefore have occurred not between hand and stone, but between one mind and another. Consider the difference between discovery and tradition. One individual accidentally strikes two stones together and produces a sharp flake. The edge proves useful, but the individual dies before anyone else learns the action. The discovery leaves no lasting evolutionary effect. Now imagine another group. A young individual watches an experienced toolmaker select a cobble. It observes the grip, the angle, the strike, the rotation of the core, the inspection of the flake. The young observer attempts the action and fails. Later, it tries again. The sequence gradually becomes more effective. No modern classroom is required. No spoken explanation is necessary. Attention, repetition, tolerance, and opportunity may be enough for a basic tradition to persist. Living primates show that behaviors can spread socially without human language. Chimpanzee communities possess different local practices. Some crack nuts. Some use particular kinds of sticks. Some perform actions not observed in neighboring populations. These are often described as cultural traditions in a broad biological sense. But human culture has an unusual capacity to accumulate. One generation does not merely copy the previous generation. It modifies what it receives. Small improvements can survive. Techniques can become more complex than any one individual would easily invent alone. This is cumulative culture. Did Homo habilis possess it? The answer remains uncertain. Oldowan tools show persistence across enormous spans of time. Their basic forms also changed relatively slowly. That pattern can be interpreted in different ways. It may indicate stable traditions effectively transmitted across generations, but it may also show that the technology could be rediscovered or reproduced with limited teaching. Experimental studies have tested how modern people learn stone knapping through observation, imitation, gesture, and verbal instruction. The results vary depending on the task and the design of the experiment. In general, communication can improve learning efficiency, but early flake production may not require modern language. A learner could acquire part of the sequence through repeated observation and practice. The safest conclusion is that Oldowan technology depended on some form of social context. Whether that context included deliberate teaching is unknown. Whether it included language is even more uncertain. Still, social learning changes the rules of adaptation. Genetic evolution operates through reproduction across generations. A learned behavior can spread within one lifetime. If conditions change, an individual does not need to wait for its descendants to evolve a new tooth or limb. It can adopt a new action, and if others copy that action, the group's behavior can shift rapidly. This does not replace natural selection. The ability to learn is itself biological. Hands, attention, memory, social tolerance, and development all have evolutionary foundations. But once information begins moving reliably between individuals, survival is shaped by two interacting inheritances. Genes pass through reproduction. Behavior passes through learning. Homo habilis lived near the beginning of this transformation, though it did not complete it. We cannot know the richness of its communication. We cannot know whether it understood the intentions of others in a modern way. We cannot know whether one individual actively corrected another. But stone traditions reveal that useful patterns persisted. The knowledge may have been shallow, it may have been fragile, yet it did not vanish after one generation. If this makes Homo habilis appear like a clear bridge toward humanity, the fossils create another problem. There may never have been one uniform species matching the familiar image. Homo habilis was named in 1964 after fossils discovered at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. The designation was controversial from the beginning. Researchers had to decide which traits were required for membership in the genus Homo. Was a larger brain necessary? Smaller teeth? A more human-like hand? Stone tool making? Upright walking? No single feature provided a perfect boundary. The type specimen, known as OH7, included parts of a juvenile individual, jaw fragments, teeth, hand bones, and pieces of the skull. From this incomplete evidence, scientists defined a new species. Later discoveries expanded the sample. They also expanded the variation. One of the best-known skulls assigned to Homo habilis is KNMER1813 from Koobi, Fora in Kenya. Its brain case is small, measuring about 510 cubic centimeters. Its face and teeth are relatively small compared with another famous skull from the same region, KNMER1470. KNMER1470 possesses a larger brain case, a broader and flatter face, and larger cheek teeth. For a time, both were included within a broad Homo habilis category, but the differences appeared too great to many researchers. KNMER1470 is now commonly assigned to Homo rudolfensis. Even this classification remains debated. Some researchers question whether rudolfensis should belong to Homo at all. Others argue that the variation among early Homo fossils may reflect sex, geography, time, or individual differences rather than multiple species. This is not simply an argument over names. Classification changes the story we tell about human origins. If Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis were separate species, then several forms of early Homo lived beside one another. If some fossils should be moved closer to Australopithecus, then the origin of our genus occurred later or differently than once assumed. If early Homo contained enormous variation within one species, then its biology was more diverse than modern comparisons might suggest. The fossil record cannot settle the issue easily. Most specimens are incomplete. Different bones come from different individuals. Skulls have been distorted by geological pressure. Age and sex are not always known, and populations separated by thousands of years can be grouped beneath one species name. Human evolution is often illustrated as a clean sequence. Australopithecus becomes Homo habilis. Homo habilis becomes Homo erectus. Homo erectus eventually leads toward later humans. The real pattern was almost certainly more like a branching bush. Species overlapped. Populations separated and reconnected. Some lineages disappeared. Others exchanged traits through shared ancestry. Different combinations of anatomy and behavior were tested at the same time. Between roughly 2 million and 1.5 million years ago, East Africa supported several hominin forms. Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, early Homo erectus, and Paranthropus could overlap broadly in time and region. They did not represent steps waiting in a single line. They were contemporaries. Each encountered changing landscapes, predators, and food resources. Each followed a somewhat different biological strategy. Paranthropus developed a powerful chewing apparatus. Homo erectus evolved a more human-like body, with relatively longer legs and shorter arms. Homo habilis retained a more primitive combination of traits. Ecological differences may have reduced direct competition in some situations, but their lives were not neatly separated. They could visit the same water sources, encounter the same carcasses, use overlapping habitats, and perhaps compete for similar foods.
Look at this.
The presence
It's
of multiple
sharp.
species
Yes.
also makes archaeological
Over there,
attribution
they
extremely difficult. A stone tool found in a sediment layer cannot automatically be assigned to the most human-looking fossil nearby. The fossil and artifact may not belong to the same individual. The occupation could have occurred at a different time within the layer. Another species may have made the tool and left no bones behind. This is why the title, First Craftsman, must be used carefully. Homo habilis existed within a technological landscape. It cannot be proven to have owned that landscape alone. Perhaps technology was already shared by several hominins. Perhaps different groups produce similar tools independently. Perhaps the behaviors we associate with Homo were not originally exclusive to Homo. This possibility changes the meaning of humanity's beginning. The threshold between human and non-human was not marked by one species suddenly acquiring intelligence. It was crossed gradually by different populations, possessing different parts of the pattern. One had greater manipulative ability. Another had a slightly larger brain. Another produced stone flakes. Another traveled farther. Evolution assembled these traits over time. There was no ceremony announcing the first human. There was only variation, survival, and inheritance. Eventually, the fossils assigned to Homo habilis disappear from the record. The precise date depends on which specimens are included in the species. By this time, another human form had become increasingly prominent, Homo erectus, early African Homo erectus, sometimes separated under the name Homo ergaster, possessed body proportions more similar to ours. The legs were relatively long. The arms were shorter compared with the torso. The body was better suited to efficient movement on the ground. Its average brain size was larger than that of Homo habilis, though early examples remained far below modern human averages. This anatomy supported a different scale of mobility. Homo erectus populations expanded beyond Africa. Fossils and tools at Dmanisi in Georgia show that early humans had reached the Caucasus by roughly 1.8 million years ago. These individuals did not possess enormous modern brains. Their tools were relatively simple. Their success demonstrates that expansion did not wait for advanced technology or modern intelligence. Behavioral flexibility, social life, and the ability to exploit varied environments may already have been sufficient. The relationship between Homo habilis and Homo erectus is not a straightforward handover. The species overlapped in time. Homo erectus did not appear only after every habilis population vanished. Both may have descended from earlier populations, or one may have emerged from a subset of forms conventionally grouped with early Homo. The fossil record is too incomplete to identify a single transformation. Technology also did not move through a clean progression. Homo erectus populations continued to use simple core and flake tools. The Acheulean tradition, with large cutting tools including hand axes, appeared later, around 1.76 million years ago, in the conventional chronology. Even then, Oldowan-like and Acheulean technologies could exist at the same time. A hand axe is often more deliberately shaped than a typical Oldowan flake or core. The maker must manage the overall form across many removals. Symmetry can be produced. Edges can be maintained around a larger object. But the Acheulean was not a sudden moment when primitive thought became advanced thought. It developed from earlier capacities: stone selection, controlled percussion, sequencing, rotation, inspection, persistence. The cognitive foundations were already old. Homo habilis, or populations close to it, lived during the period in which those foundations became archaeologically visible. Its legacy, therefore, cannot be reduced to a direct line of descent. A species can contribute to history without being the sole ancestor of what follows. Behavioral traditions can continue, even when population names change. A technique can move between groups. A survival strategy can reappear in new anatomical forms. The individual carrier disappears. The information remains. This is perhaps the deepest significance of early technology. Before tools, adaptation was recorded mainly in bodies. After tools, adaptation could also be recorded in objects. A sharp flake preserved a decision. A stone core preserved a sequence of impacts. A transported cobble preserved an expectation of future use. A butchered bone preserved the moment an edge met tissue. These are not merely artifacts. They are traces of vanished minds. We cannot recover the thoughts themselves. We cannot know the name, age, or social position of the toolmaker. We cannot know whether the strike was confident or hesitant, but we can see that an action was repeated. The world was no longer accepted only as it appeared. It was modified. That capacity would eventually expand far beyond stone. Humans would shape wood, bone, fibers, metals, landscapes, rivers, plants, animals, and energy. Technology would allow our species to enter deserts, forests, islands, high mountains, and frozen regions. It would support language, agriculture, cities, industry, medicine, global communication, and machines capable of processing information. But the line from a stone flake to a spacecraft is not a smooth chain of inevitable progress. Many technologies were lost. Many populations disappeared. Innovation could create danger as well as opportunity. Tools increased human power, but they also increased the consequences of human decisions. Nothing about Homo habilis guaranteed the arrival of modern civilization. Its world contained possibilities, not destiny. This is why the search for the first human may be based on the wrong question. We want a boundary, a moment before which humanity did not exist, and after which it did. We search for a fossil that looks human enough, a brain large enough, a hand skilled enough, a tool old enough. But evolution rarely creates boundaries that clean. Homo habilis was human-like in some ways, and deeply primitive in others. It walked upright, yet retained traits connected to climbing ancestors. Its brain was larger than that of many earlier hominins, yet remained far smaller than ours. It may have produced tools, but stone technology existed before it. It may have passed behavior socially, but we cannot demonstrate language or formal teaching. It may belong inside Homo, or it may sit near a disputed border between Homo and Australopithecus. This uncertainty is not a failure of science. It is the discovery. Humanity did not begin as a completed form. It emerged through mosaics, through overlapping species, through experiments that succeeded for a time and then disappeared, through bodies that carried old anatomy while exploring new behavior, through tools whose makers remain unnamed, through knowledge that may have traveled farther than the genes of the individuals who held it. Homo habilis may not have been the first human. It may not have been the first craftsman. It may not have been the direct ancestor of later Homo. But it represents a world in which thought was becoming increasingly visible through action. A world in which physical weakness did not always lead to extinction. A world in which flexibility could compete with strength. A world in which an animal without claws could make an edge. Without crushing teeth, it could open bone. Without waiting for anatomy to change, it could alter its behavior. And without understanding the future in anything like the way we do, it could carry a useful object toward a need that had not yet arrived. That may be the more meaningful beginning. Not the first time a brain became large. Not the first time an animal picked up an object. Not the first time one stone broke against another. But the long evolutionary period in which imagined solutions began to influence survival. Once useful actions could be repeated, observed, and preserved, adaptation was no longer written only in bone. It was written in behavior. And once behavior could accumulate, the future of the human lineage began to depend on more than the bodies it inherited. It began to depend on what one mind could leave for another. More than 2 million years later, we still live inside that transformation. Every tool around us is part of an external world, built from remembered solutions. Every technology carries knowledge accumulated by people who did not live to see its final form. No single individual invented the modern world. Each generation inherited materials, methods, mistakes, and possibilities. Then, it added something of its own. The first stone toolmakers could not have imagined cities, engines, computers, or spacecraft. They did not need to. The revolutionary act was smaller. A stone was seen not only for what it was, but for what it could become. And before humanity could transform the planet, one of our ancestors first had to transform a stone. This is Humanity World. Discover the forces that shaped us.